Good morning, y'all. I have been going through a significant amount of forecast data this morning, and I want to have a very specific, very honest conversation with you about the pattern that has been developing across the United States over the past several days, because it has crossed a threshold this week that I think deserves the word concerning in a way that I try to use carefully and deliberately. Not alarming, not catastrophic, concerning. Which means it is a pattern that is producing multiple simultaneous hazards across a broad area, that those hazards are affecting different communities in different ways at the same time, and that the forecast guidance looking into next week is not showing me a clean, simple break that gives everyone a chance to exhale and reset. What the WPC's own extended forecast discussion from this Thursday morning is showing me instead is an amplified pattern. Their word, amplified, that features a warming ridge over the Intermountain West and Southern Plains, sandwiched between troughs that are keeping the eastern United States unsettled and wet. That is a pattern that keeps producing. And it has been producing. Let me walk you through exactly what it has done this week, what it is doing right now, and what the next 7 to 10 days look like based on the official data. What happened this week? The triple hazard that unfolded simultaneously. Y'all, before I get into what is coming, I have to make sure you understand what has already happened this week, because the simultaneous nature of the hazards that have been active across the country over the past 4 days is the clearest possible illustration of what a concerning pattern actually looks like in practice. 3 distinct major weather hazard zones have been active at the same time. 3, simultaneously, affecting different parts of the country, requiring different responses, demanding attention from different communities all at once. The first was Tropical Depression 2, which the National Hurricane Center issued its first advisory on Sunday morning, centered south of Panama City, Florida. The system formed west of Florida with a discernible mid-level circulation that gradually acquired banding features and organized surface low pressure. By Sunday afternoon, the NHC had upgraded it to a tropical depression. Formation odds had risen dramatically over the weekend, from the 20% I reported earlier in the week all the way to 80%. And the NHC began forecasting the system to cross the 39-mile-per-hour sustained wind threshold into tropical storm Bertha status, which would make it only the second named storm of the 2026 Atlantic hurricane season. A tropical storm watch was placed in effect for the Florida Panhandle coast from the Ochlockonee River westward to the Alabama-Mississippi border. The track projected slow northwestward motion followed by a west-northwest turn, and the critical framing from the NHC's own key messages was this. This is a flood event, not a wind event, for the Gulf Coast. 2 to 4 inches of rainfall widespread from the western Florida panhandle through southern Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and possibly the Texas coast. Isolated totals reaching 8 inches in the strongest thunderstorm bands. Storm surge of 1 to 3 feet above normal tide levels along the watch area on the Florida panhandle. In flat coastal cities with aging drainage infrastructure, New Orleans being the most obvious example in the storm's path, 4 to 8 inches falling over 36 to 48 hours can overwhelm pump systems before the sky even clears. The flooding threat from Bertha for the northern Gulf Coast is real, and it is ongoing as you watch this video. The second simultaneous hazard was the heat dome over the central United States, which this week produced some of the most extreme heat index values of the entire summer. The National Weather Service was explicit. Portions of southern Illinois, western Kentucky, and southeast Missouri were under extreme heat warnings with heat index values projected to reach 116 degrees Fahrenheit. 116 degrees. That is not a temperature range where the language of caution is appropriate. That is a temperature range where the language of medical emergency is appropriate, where heat stroke can occur in fully healthy adults without air conditioning within minutes of sustained outdoor exposure. And the third simultaneous hazard was the severe weather outbreak that the NWS Ohio Valley office specifically documented for July 21st. A cluster of thunderstorms developed during the afternoon, powered by a very unstable air mass and strong winds aloft, and produced widespread damaging winds, several confirmed tornadoes, and numerous flash flood reports from extreme rain rates, all simultaneously. Multiple hazards from a single storm system, documenting in real time what happens when the kind of instability and shear this blocked pattern generates gets a trigger to work with. 3 hazards, 3 different regions, 3 different communities that needed to be paying attention to 3 different sets of warnings at the same time. That is the concerning pattern. That is what I mean when I use that word. The WPC extended discussion. What the next week shows? Y'all, let me walk you through what the Weather Prediction Center's extended forecast discussion, issued at 2:18 a.m. Eastern Time this Thursday morning, is showing for the coming weekend and into next week, because it is the most authoritative, most current, and most complete picture of the pattern I have access to right now. The WPC is describing the coming period with language that I want to make sure every region of the country understands clearly. The amplified pattern will feature a warming intermountain west, southwest, Rockies, and southern Plains ridge, sandwiched between a trough just off the west coast and an increasingly unsettled and wet eastern United States. That structural description tells you everything about what the next week is going to look like for the country. The southern ridge is the heat story. The WPC is explicitly using the phrase hazardous heat for this weekend into next week across the west central and southern United States, with monsoonal rains expected to focus over the four corner states simultaneously. That pairing, hazardous heat in the southern plains and Gulf region while the southwest and four corners get monsoonal convection, is the amplified summer pattern in its most characteristic form. Communities in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, the lower Mississippi Valley, and along the Gulf Coast are going to be dealing with a continued returning heat dome. After weeks of heat, after the accumulated physiological burden of two previous major heat events, after the ground is already baked and the overnight temperatures have been refusing to drop to recovery levels, more hazardous heat is coming for those communities this weekend. Meanwhile, the WPC is simultaneously flagging a heavy convection and rain pattern focusing into the eastern United States next week, an increasingly unsettled and wet eastern U.S. The troughs that are riding around the northern and eastern flanks of the ridge are going to be bringing repeated rounds of heavy rainfall into the mid-Atlantic and northeast through the middle and end of next week. The NWS was already flagging major cities along the East Coast, Washington, D.C., and Baltimore specifically, as potential recipients of heavy rain midweek, with forecasters expecting the most rainfall in eastern Virginia, North Carolina, and Maryland. That corridor, the same corridor that dealt with flash flooding earlier this month, is in line for another heavy rainfall episode as the next trough digs through. The flooding concern that AccuWeather has been flagging all summer, y'all. I want to make sure I spend time on a specific flooding concern that AccuWeather's long-range team flagged in their summer 2026 forecast back in May, because it has proven accurate and it continues to be relevant for the weeks ahead. Their team specifically identified the flooding zone to watch most closely in the summer of 2026 as running from Texas to the Ohio Valley. And they specifically included the area of the Texas Hill Country in that designation, flagging it as an area that was devastated in 2025 and that remained particularly vulnerable in 2026. The events of the past month have fully validated that designation. The Texas Hill Country received multiple rounds of catastrophic flooding in July, including a high risk of excessive rainfall designation from the WPC. The Ohio Valley has seen severe storms, flash flooding, and tornado activity confirmed by the NWS Cincinnati Weather Forecast Office. And the concern looking forward is not that this flooding zone is finished with its active period. The WPC's extended discussion for Sunday through Thursday of next week is showing continued heavy convection focused into the east, exactly the corridor that connects the Ohio Valley to the mid-Atlantic, with ample uncertainties growing with time as individual systems work through the flow. What that language means in practice is that the heavy rain pattern for the east is not a single well-defined event with a clean beginning and end. It is a period of unsettled weather driven by a succession of short-wave troughs moving through the long-wave trough over the east, each one producing its own batch of heavy rainfall and severe weather, with the ground getting progressively wetter and more susceptible to flooding with each successive event. The same antecedent soil moisture problem that the WPC has been flagging throughout this summer, the soil saturating from prior rainfall events, reducing the ground's capacity to absorb additional rainfall, is going to be compounding across the east as next week's heavy convection arrives on top of already wet soil. The air quality dimension, the hazard, nobody is talking about. Enough, y'all. I want to spend a moment on something that is genuinely part of this week's concerning pattern and that I think is getting far less attention than it deserves in the weather coverage. Air quality. This week's simultaneous weather pattern. Tropical depression. Bertha-producing smoke-trapping high pressure over portions of the southeast as it pulls the atmosphere down around its circulation. Wildfire smoke from the ongoing western wildfire season being transported eastward on the mid-level flow, and the urban heat island effect concentrating pollutants in the extreme heat over the central United States has produced what one major news outlet described as tropical storm, heat dome, and toxic air simultaneously affecting much of the United States. Toxic air. That is a phrase that belongs in an industrial accident report, not a summer weather forecast. And yet, it is the accurate descriptor for the air quality conditions that communities from the western wildfire smoke corridor through the heat-stressed urban centers of the Midwest, and into the coastal regions under Bertha's circulation are dealing with simultaneously. The health implications of degraded air quality during extreme heat are compounding. Fine particulate matter from wildfire smoke reduces lung function, and reduced lung function impairs the body's ability to manage heat stress efficiently through the cardiovascular effort that cooling requires. People with asthma, COPD, and cardiovascular disease who are simultaneously exposed to extreme heat and elevated PM2. 5 concentrations face a compounded health risk that is greater than either hazard in isolation. If you are in a region where the AQI is running in the unhealthy range and the heat index is above 100 degrees, simultaneously, which describes portions of the Midwest and South this week, please take both seriously at the same time, not one or the other. What you need to do, right now, region by region. Let me close with a direct, specific action guidance for each part of this country that is currently in the crosshairs of the concerning pattern I have been describing. If you are on the northern Gulf Coast, from the Florida Panhandle through southern Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, tropical storm. Bertha's primary threat is flooding rainfall, not wind. Monitor your local NWS office's flood watches and warnings closely. Do not drive through flooded roadways. Know your low-lying flood-prone areas and avoid them during the period of heaviest rainfall. Storm surge of 1 to 3 feet is possible along the Panhandle watch area. If you are in a low-lying coastal area, be aware of what your tide gauge is showing and what additional water a 1 to 3 foot surge on top of high tide means for your property. If you are in the central United States, southern Illinois, western Kentucky, southeast Missouri, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, extreme heat with heat indices approaching or exceeding 116 degrees Fahrenheit is your primary hazard right now. This is a life-threatening heat range. Stay inside with air conditioning during peak afternoon hours. Check on your elderly neighbors before the heat peaks, not after. Know the signs of heat stroke and treat them as a medical emergency. If you are in the Ohio Valley, Mid-Atlantic, or Northeast, the heavy rain and severe weather pattern continues through next week as successive troughs move through the long wave trough over the east. Watch for flash flood watches and warnings, know your flood-prone roads, and monitor your local National Weather Service office's forecasts daily. The soil is wet. The drainage systems are stressed. Additional heavy rainfall in this corridor will produce flooding more quickly than it would on dry ground. Bertha's outer bands are going to be spinning up tornadoes along the Gulf Coast tonight and tomorrow night. The severe weather associated with the cold front crossing the Midwest and Ohio Valley has already produced confirmed tornadoes this week, and more are possible as the front continues east. A direct phone call to your number when a tornado warning covers your exact location, cutting through Do Not Disturb, ringing until you answer, getting you up into shelter, is $14.95 for a full year. Please set it up right now. Y'all, the pattern that has been developing across the United States this week is concerning in every sense of the word I use that term. Tropical depression to becoming Tropical Storm Bertha over the northern Gulf, bringing a flood event to the Gulf Coast from Florida to Louisiana. Heat index values reaching 116 degrees in the central United States. A confirmed tornado outbreak in the Ohio Valley with widespread damaging winds and extreme rain rates on July 21st. Air quality described by national outlets as toxic across multiple regions simultaneously. And the WPC's extended forecast discussion, looking ahead to this weekend and next week, showing hazardous heat persisting over the western and southern United States, while an increasingly unsettled and wet pattern takes hold across the east. This is what an amplified, blocked summer weather pattern looks like at its most consequential. And I am going to be tracking every piece of it every single day as it continues to evolve. Subscribe and ring that notification bell. Share this video with everyone you know from the Gulf Coast to the Great Lakes to the East Coast, because every one of those communities is in a different chapter of this same concerning pattern right now. And as always, stay safe out there. I love y'all.